Hello world, it's me, Dennis, and I am here with Sharon Hausman Cohen and Carol Bilich. Bilich. I like Bilich better.
Good.
Anyway,
because
right?
that's right. Mm-hmm.
Because it's right.
That's right.
Anyway, we're going to be talking science, and we're going to be talking about the evolution and the leading edge of what these two women, what you're doing. Doctor, you two, and you're a practitioner and an energy practitioner and work with the mind-body connection, and you two are you have started a company called
Integrative DNA.
Integrative DNA. Doesn't that sound interesting? That's an interesting place to start. So tell me the history of this and how did you get that name?
Why don't you tell the history of our name, Carol? Okay. So we started out, we were looking for lots of different names and trying to decide how we could put the description of what we do inside of our name so that it would be less problematic for most people.
Exactly, in something that is such a leading edge.
Right. And we came up with a name we loved. It was called In-Depth DNA, meaning we were taking a deep look or a deep dive inside of DNA, inside of the science of DNA, to better understand how someone might be affected by their genome.
Right.
And we loved that name, but unfortunately someone else also loved that name. And during the trademark period, those people were applying as we were applying. And so theirs came out a week before ours did, and they have In-Depth Genomics, I think is the name of that company.
Right.
And they already had funding. They had a whole lot of other things that we hadn't gotten to yet, and so we relinquished that name.
Yes.
And quickly had to come up with another name. And so we went out for dinner. Actually, we were celebrating my youngest son's birthday, and I said, let's have a brainstorm session about a new name. And so, you know, a couple of margaritas were involved, and we came up with a few names, and I said, we should just call ourselves Two Dumb Chicks DNA. And and of course, I thought that was hilarious.
Yes.
And Sharon kind of looked at me like, I don't like to be called dumb. So, and so we pondered a little bit more and came up with intelligent.
Right.
And we liked that part, but we didn't want it to be intelligent DNA. And so we started thinking about it a little bit more, and we liked the chicks part.
Yes.
And we thought, well, chicks kind of sounds like two X's, two X chromosomes,
Yes.
two women, intelligent women DNA. So Integrative DNA.
Oh, that is a wonderful origin story. That is terrific. Thank you for letting her telling her that. And you got your understanding of it as a doctor, as a physician, as an understanding in the science of it. What attracted you here? What did you say, wait a minute, this is important for us to be able to...
Well, I've been in the field of genomics indirectly and directly for a number of decades. When
Yes.
I started out going to graduate school, not medical school, many years ago. I went to Harvard initially to do a PhD in medicine, and part of the research I had done had been with genomes, and
Sure.
In those days we were calling it something different, but still looking at the effects of different DNA and DNA mutations or variations. So it had always been an interest of mine, and we had been using over the past decade in our practice single little changes in the DNA to get a better understanding of some specific issues. So there's a gene called Mthfr. Some people think it stands for mother-father. Some people think it stands for many other things.
Yes.
But it actually stands for methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase. Don't say that 3 times fast.
Of course.
But we were using that because it would have a big implication in things like depression.
Yes.
We were using certain other genes with relationship to cardiology, but we weren't using them all together. We were kind of using one gene at a time.
Now, when you say the word using, what does that mean? How do you use it?
That's a great question. So, for example, in that one, which is probably one of the most famous genes, MTHFR, it's the ability to take folic acid, which is from leafy greens,
Yes.
and convert it to a form that can get into the brain. And that methylated form that gets into the brain is what's needed in order to make the brain chemicals that help with mood and memory And so knowing people who were inefficient at making that form of the methylfolate would allow us to help them need less medicines for depression, because we could just give them methylfolate so they could better make their own neurotransmitters or brain chemicals like serotonin and norepinephrine.
So if you see that in my DNA, then do you repair that in the DNA, or does it, or do you just find ways to compensate for its not?
You go ahead.
Okay, so basically, so the technology to repair it, it's coming. That's CRISPR, that's a gene editing, but that's not what we're doing. That's still really, really an early experiment. What we're saying is that gene allows you to make methylfolate, which is kind of like saying, which is one of the ingredients for making the brain chemical serotonin is what Prozac and Zoloft and those kind of common antidepressants work on.
Sure.
But they just recycle them. And what we're saying is, well, wouldn't it be better if you could make more on your own rather than having to use drugs? So we just give people methylfolate, or we give them riboflavin, because that helps that gene work.
Right.
So by understanding what's going on with a person's DNA, we can then give them targeted supplements and vitamins and things like that to help them.
So it really gives you a tool, a diagnostic tool. And when you're talking about, because you deal with mind-body connection in your practice as a practitioner, right? Can you talk about your practice?
Sure. I do what's called integrative manual therapy. So I take a whole host of different types of modalities, including what's called visceral manipulation or lymphatic drainage therapy, and in a medical setting provide the body's impetus an opportunity to heal on its own. So if I note that something isn't functioning at a high level of of function, then I try to increase that function, and if I can't, I try to find out what may be complicating that. And that's the same as what's happening in the genome. We're looking at a variety of things. We're not looking at just one gene, because, and this is an important point, I think, too, is that when you're looking at different genomic concerns, no one product is the same as any other product.
Right.
Each company picks what they want to look at. And so you really can't compare one product to another product. You can only compare what is this product offering, and is it the same as this other one, and how do they do it? And that's a very different thing as well. So going back to the mind-body, if I can understand that there's a component that the mind is controlling over the body and it's a somatic issue, then I'm going to attend to that in a somatic way. If it's more of a physiological aspect of function or dysfunction that's affecting the mind, then I'm going to go that direction.
So when we use that term, because psychosomatic has gotten such a pejorative meaning when it really isn't. I mean, it really does bring that together, doesn't it, as the mind and body, as I understand it?
Yes, it absolutely does. I mean, we are absolutely pulled in directions by our thoughts and by our physical experiences.
So tell me about the journey. I could talk about that for hours with you, and I will. But talk about the journey as a business people, as sitting there and saying, we are going to go out, and so tell me your business model. Tell me what it works, how it works, what you're thinking about.
So what happened is I was in private practice, but in a little bit more of a traditional model. With insurance, and not necessarily 15-minute visits. We tried to give as much time as we could, and I was attracting very complicated medical patients that people who wanted me to untangle their medical mysteries.
You mean human beings?
Human beings that weren't just like
so now I get it. Okay, so all right, go ahead.
So people wanted that help, and we decided that was something, and that was something that I really wanted to do, that I had the skills to be able to help the people who maybe had not gotten the help from the traditional medical system. And so I switched to a practice that was a little different practice model that allowed me to it was a concierge practice. Carol and I co-founded it because we realized there was so much more we could do together. Sometimes the different techniques that she used with chronic pain, with all kinds of issues, were added such an important additive effect, and also Carol was a fabulous researcher, and so we joined forces and created this new practice called Resilient Health. which was really fun, and we thought that was going to be kind of the end of it.
We did.
Yes,
We did think
that
that.
would have
However,
been,
that would have been
yeah.
enough, as
Would
we
have been
say,
enough.
Diane.
Go ahead.
There's a-
You want to tell God your plan.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So saying enough. We thought that was enough. But then what people were coming to us with was their DNA, because 23andMe was popular by this point.
Yes.
And they were saying, I have a family history of Alzheimer's, or I have a family history of heart disease. Can you use my DNA to help me prevent heart disease and Alzheimer's and a host of other things?
Well, we were actually doing that already before people were bringing in their 23andMe, because both of us being researchers were delving into the published literature in the National Institutes of Health and looking for clues, as we call them, to guide us. But at that point, it wasn't about the genomics, it was more about symptomatology and the diagnostics that were available. And so we began looking at different components in addition to those pieces that we brought in the genomics. And so as we started looking at each individual SNP, which is a piece of that DNA, we learned, oh, this is connected to this, and this is connected to this, and this is connected to this. And that's why a person might have a chronic disease, as opposed to what is an event, a genetic event. Chronic diseases are not a one gene type of event.
There's no heart disease gene. There's no diabetes gene. There's no one gene that gives you Alzheimer's. There are in some very rare cases, like early form of Alzheimer's,
but
but
when we're
the
talking
majority. And so when we started looking at those different diseases, we said, well, like, for example, with heart disease, we found that although there were maybe 100 different genes that might contribute a little bit, increase your risk 8% or 5%, there were a smaller set of genes that we knew what they did that had significant increase on risk, 20%, 200%,
So get
70%.
we need to work on the ones that could, the greatest risk factor.
Right.
Right.
So the first thing we did is kind of map out which ones had some of the most significant risk factors. And then we went into the literature and said, well, what can we do about it? So if there's a gene that causes hardening of the arteries, calcium to build up in the walls, we said, what can be done? And then we were able to go through the literature, prove that on that pathway, vitamin K2 can help block that from happening. And so, but if you have inflammation, which is a big source of heart disease and brain inflammation and diabetes, almost every chronic disease, that's going to be a different set of interventions. And why there are medicines that work on those genes, if someone's using something for prevention or they just don't want to use medicines, they're going to be more interested in the fact that curcumin, which is from turmeric, or sulforaphane from broccoli sprouts extract, or different things like that. There's something called resolvins from trout that can all address those inflammatory pathways. And so we matched up the genes with the interventions, but we also then went to the level of saying, okay, we're only going to put curcumin in the cardiac panel, like with the cardiac genes as an intervention, if there's studies showing that curcumin reduces cardiac disease. And so that's kind of how we built this.
The outcomes had to match, because otherwise they're not clinically relevant, and we are clinicians.
Yes.
And so if we just said, well, it might work and you can try this, then that would, negate the point of having the genomics at all.
Yeah. So you have, not only do you have your practice, but you also have your research arm there. So how do you, so do you get together and then and have to actually transition into the research?
We're always doing research.
Right. Exactly.
We kind of joke that we do our practices 4 days a week and Intellex DNA 4 days a week.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that tends
and
to work.
On the ninth day, you rested.
That's
That's right.
So that, yeah.
But it's we have a research team, and so we have.
We do now. We didn't. It used to be just the
It used
two
to be
of us.
us.
Exactly. But of course, I mean, Paige and Bryn used to be just the two of them. So and then comes Google. So that's the way that. So how is it not only progressing at this particular stage? Where is it right now, as far as your primary audience is the practitioner, right? I mean, this is it, rather than being the person in their home.
Well, we only sell to clinicians. We are what's called clinical decision support software.
Got it.
Which means you can't make a decision just based on someone's DNA. You have
Right.
to include their family history, their own medical history,
Yes.
what their own values, what medicines they're on, all those kinds of things. So yes, our audience are clinicians, but we really find that right now, because it's kind of like going from the X-ray to the MRI, now you have all this data.
Oh, that makes it, it's
Right.
that much of a
It's
shift.
such
in
a
that.
huge shift
It is.
that it's a very special kind of clinician.
So how is the medical community accepting, resisting? Because it's a short story. My niece, who happens to be this very well-known colorectal surgeon, but when she was going through medical school in I think like the early 2000s or this is at a big medical school. She eventually went on to Mayo, but they told her, you have 7 minutes from the time the patient walks in to the time you need to be moving to the next one. That's the insurance company model in this. So,
Well, it's definitely difficult in a 7-minute model.
not
It-
happening.
it-
It
it
doesn't happen. That's not our target
I know.
audience.
That's what I'm saying. But that's what they told the students. But
Right.
the idea being is that you're talking about really getting a chance to spend time and get to know people and get to know. So how is the medical community and the just in general at large, with you guys being on the leading edge, what's the thought process?
I do think that genomics is becoming part of more mainstream language, but not part of mainstream care. And part of that has to do with the insurance model. What time limits the doctor has, and the fact that genomics isn't covered by insurance, genomic testing is not covered by insurance, but pharmacogenomics can be, which has to do more with
explain
the.
So you're seeing little slivers, little breakages in the.
Pharmacogenomics is how a person metabolizes drugs. And so for certain drugs like the blood thinner Plavix that's given after someone has a stent, or for tamoxifen or Coumadin, there are actually known genes that can affect whether someone needs a little bit, whether they need a lot, whether it's going to work for them or not. That's starting to get into the knowledge base of kind of clinicians in general, but not doing genomics to kind of say, let's use genomics to help untangle Alzheimer's or autism or heart disease or osteoporosis.
Right.
That is where we're really cutting edge.
Are you specializing
Yes.
in a direction?
Yes, we have consciously focused on chronic illness and those things that are not the one gene disease states.
Right.
And we have a great track record, actually. We've done a lot of really good work with many patients in reversing cognitive decline of various levels using genomics. So we are focusing heavily on that, but we have the other reports as well that talk about heart disease, that talks about obesity and macular degeneration and a whole host of other ones.
Diabetes.
And we are currently working on a report to help with the issues of autism.
Yes.
And which is, again, is not a one gene illness. And so going back to that comment that I made earlier is that physicians, I think, are going to be pushed more by the demand of consumers because the information's already available to them by these consumer products. And so many self-hackers or biohackers are affecting their health either in the right way or in the wrong way, not knowing, and then frustrated and get upset that they can't get the effect that they're looking for and go looking for doctors who can help them with these issues. And so we're looking for and are creating a stable of, we are training many doctors across the country so that they can learn how to use genomics in practice.
And you were asking about our target, like who are the doctors that are doing this?
Right.
And what we found, we initially reached out to a lot of different kinds of doctors, and the ones that have really embraced this tend to be doctors that are trained in functional or integrative medicine, that have practices that allow them to spend a lot of time with their patients, and that they're generally at a stage of life where that's what they want to do. And so it's the two big groups we found are doctors who have already had kind of their first career and have seen the benefits of medicine, but not had it meet all their patients' needs.
Yes.
They then have become trained in integrative and functional medicine, because of course that wasn't around 30 years ago or 20 years ago. But they tend to be very, what I would call, high-end doctors.
Yes.
The previous dean of the Mayo Medical Clinic
Exactly.
School, the Mayo Medical School, the person who took over the clinic for Dr. Perlmutter in Naples, Florida. So we have, doctors that have really good reputations across the country, which is an exciting group of doctors to work with, because we all learn from each other.
So how do we, I know it must be hard to be at this place and sit there and go, okay, here's the need, here's the 7 billion population in the world, and here's the distance between here and there. How do you keep your eye on the ball with, and then, but also still seeing of this has to be something that can be done in Nairobi, that can be done in Kiev, and can be done in Bastrop.
Yes. So we first, when I first was at a conference and speaking, people came up to Carol and I from all over the world, because it was an international conference, and we actually thought about
where
that.
our world headquarters.
Yes, they asked
were.
our world headquarters.
Exactly as you're saying.
We're like right here in Austin.
Come on over to the Honda. We'll be over here.
That's right. And we were just starting at that time, and we actually had to make a decision. So right now our goal is to make sure we have doctors in every state that are trained, and that's our first goal. And we have,
Beautiful.
there's some states we have a lot of doctors in, and there's some states we're still working on. And then our next goal is to then look at where else there's more need. So we do also have doctors and people trained in Australia, because we have a PhD that works with us. She's been the lead researcher on our autism report. So we know the need to get it across the world, but we're taking baby steps, because it's a big undertaking to get people trained.
This is a huge, to know that you're on the leading edge of what is going to be changing and impacting all of us in the time. I mean,
I like what he just said.
Because it's an extraordinary experience to be able to be there, and then just to keep after it every day and to be learning. Yes. I mean, we are literally going from looking at what medicine was, bloodletting, and doing the work we're doing, and then knowing that each time we're learning and learning about what it's an extraordinary experience that you guys are going through.
Thank you.
What are the misunderstandings about genomics and DNA that people have that can be cleared up? Help me in my ignorance.
Well, I'll start, but then I'll pass the baton. There's a lot of popular information about genetics and genomics that certainly contains certain pieces of truth, but they don't always bring out the same outcome.
Got it.
So we talked a little bit about, do you compare this product to this product? You really can't do that, because as I said, each company chooses what they are going to be attending to in the genome. I mean, there are a lot of genes in there. And so there are companies that focus on cancer. There are companies that focus on the one gene problem. And then there are companies that focus on things that provide small levels of insight, but nothing necessarily as to what to do about it. And then there are companies like ours that have particular models that we're following. Okay, so we're looking at the chronic disease model, and how can we affect that? But how can we do it so that we know it's clinically relevant? How can we do it so that we know that the outcomes that we're hoping to get will be done by the modifications that we provide?
Oh, wonderful. And it's repeatable and scalable.
Yes.
And I think that in terms of misconceptions, because you had also asked about that, or things that,
Please.
Problems. One, people often they'll say, I don't want to know my DNA because I don't want to know if I'm going to get Alzheimer's. And that's probably the biggest misconception, because every single thing we look at is a modifiable gene. So even what people call the Alzheimer's gene, ApoE4, ApoE4 increases the risk 3-fold with 1 copy approximately, 12-fold with 2 copies. But just because you have ApoE4 doesn't mean you're going to get Alzheimer's. And that's the whole point of what we're doing is if you know what contributing factors, do you have mitochondrial, which are like little energy producing things inside your cells? Do you have mitochondrial issues? Do you have inflammatory issues? Do you need more choline or more B12 than average? By knowing all those things, you can reverse cognitive impairment many times, and you can decrease your risk. So we tell people the DNA is not your destiny, it's your family history. And if you can know your history and you know what kind of things your family has a little bit of more, a little less resiliency towards and a little more, needs to be a little more careful about, that you're more prone to inflammation, well then we can tell you how do you lower inflammation with food and supplements, exercise even. So that's the big thing is DNA is not your destiny.
No.
It is your book of you.
It's like my Google map that can sit there and just say,
Exactly.
oh, there's a blockage in this way. Here's a shorter way that is a way around
That
it.
is fantastic.
And that's giving, that's all you're doing is you're giving us information to be able to deal with it.
Right, that's fantastic, because if you learn before you ever have a blood clot in your legs that you are 5 times higher risk to get blood clots when you travel internationally, well then you can do something about it. Or like I found out that I don't transport B12 very well because of 2 gene variants, is what we call them, or SNPs. So I don't transport it well into the brain, so I need more B12 than average. So when you learn these things about yourself, then you can optimize. You can really say, well, I want my brain to function optimally.
Right.
I don't mind taking extra B12.
And it reduces the fear of getting a certain disease because, first of all, we only report on things that are modifiable. But second, it's an invitation. You're getting to explore yourself in ways that you could never do before.
No, it was simple. It was this. I was talking with the CFO of one of the nation's largest hospitals, and he said, we cannot survive on the making people who are sick better. We have to go from the wellness model. We have to find some way to reward wellness and to reward that. And that's where I see this as really being that opportunity.
And that is exactly what we're trying to do. So I'm a family physician by training, and a lot of times people say, you're a family physician? That seems like an odd, medical director for a genomics company. And I'm like, no, it's perfect. It's perfect because we're
it is
trying
by
to prevent.
definition, that's what it should be.
We want to prevent things. And so really one of the problems is American medicine has been very reactive. If you are having a heart attack or having a stroke, hospital's a great place to be.
And the best care in the world.
Absolutely. But if you have a family history of diabetes and heart disease and stroke, people really aren't able to give, doctors aren't trained in giving specific recommendations. And with the tools that Intelligent DNA gives a doctor, they can then sit down with you and say, oh, for you, these kinds of foods are really going to raise your blood sugar more. And if you have more whey protein, or if you take this herb, or you eat less of these foods and more of these foods, we can help prevent you from getting diabetes.
Which actually, when we look at it from an economic model, when we're looking at it from every model, you end up saving billions, trillions. You really work down when you work on the wellness model.
Right. And
Absolutely.
it also does, it does something else that to me is extremely important. It destigmatizes ill health that can't be named. And there are millions of people who are unwell, seriously ill, who just don't have any hope. And they go to doctor after doctor after doctor trying to find care and having to defend themselves.
Yes.
And that is an extraordinarily frustrating place to be as a patient, but just as a human being, you don't want to be told, oh, you might need to go over there and, talk to those folks.
Yep.
Yeah. Carol's talking a lot about things like when we have patients who come to us, Carol specializes a lot in pain and fatigue and things like that. And we'll have someone coming to us with chronic fatigue and they've been told they're depressed. And then we're able to show, look, you don't make CoQ10 well. CoQ10 is the main food for mitochondria that make energy. and you don't remove the different toxins, like things like pesticides, like glyphosates, which is what they spray the crops with, that's kind of an oversimplification, or
Sure.
you need more of certain vitamins, or you don't convert thyroid hormone to the active form. And then all of a sudden, they're like, oh, okay, so or they may have genes that make them more tired that are only found in 1% of the population. But when they understand that, then they don't feel so bad. Even with obesity, there are some people who obviously have many more struggles with obesity. And when they understand that their body stores fat much more efficiently, which would have been great if you were starving in Poland, not necessarily so great when you're living in an area where you can go to the supermarket and have tons of calories.
Did I just have a stroke, or did the lights
The
change?
lights
did
change?
Oh, thank you. Oh, I'm so glad. All right, just
Yes,
in
we're not
case
gonna do
anyone is
the-
looking over here, but
we're
we're
not
going to
doing
have
it in
this
the dark.
mood lighting. We're going into the evening
Yes.
portion of the show where we're just relaxing. So if we have, you don't need to have we'll serve a little wine and just relax as we're enjoying this. In the last part, now here's one of when I was growing up, and I'm 71 this year in 2019, is that all right, so we're going to take an edit here, and even though, and then they're going to re-get the lights
I can scratch
on
myself,
and
right?
on that.
I know I scratched my eye once doing it. Sorry about it.
I'm just so glad. Just wanted to make sure that everything was okay.
We like the mood lighting, Donna, but we want the wine then.
I
Only
like
if it comes
that.
with only if
I-
it comes with a bucket full of Silmarin.
We can fix the.
and it had.
Push an hour. We were gonna get close. I gotta go ask him. I think I break.
One of the things that fascinates me is that if I go to the vet and I have a 20-pound dog, they would prescribe by weight. But if I have a 40-pound dog, they prescribe a different amount by weight. But a 110-pound woman and a 240-pound man, I'm not 240, but I was. But anyhow, why did I even have to say that? It doesn't matter. The point is that it does. I don't see on the side of the medical label, take according to your weight. Why is that?
Well, in some drugs they do that with, and other drugs it's because there's a wide range of what can work for someone. But that's exactly the point. Is actually if you dig deeper into someone's genomics, one person might be better off taking, so with statins, you hear about people talking about muscle aches from statins. Yeah. That's another topic we cover in our reports. And for some people, they can take, 40 milligrams of Lipitor every day and they'll be fine, or whatever one, Zocor or whatever, Crestor. For
Right.
other people, because of a gene, they are much slower to break it down. So if they're taking 40 milligrams of Lipitor on day one and they're not breaking it down, by the time it's been in them for 2 weeks, if their liver isn't able to take it up and break it down effectively, they now have 200, way more than they should be having, and they start to get muscle aches. So we can then take those people and say, wait, this person doesn't break it down, so only give them 10 milligrams of Lipitor and skip Saturday
Yes.
and Sunday. So absolutely, genomics and individual differences, not just weight, but differences in metabolism should be used.
Oh, that's terrific. That's terrific. It is. What I'm interested in is that, again, how can you see this moving into the medical practice of? Don't answer that question right now. It's too interesting. I want to wait till we're on that. How does my mindfulness impact my health?
Wow, that is a big question. That's a question that we would have to talk about for probably the entire.
You should tell them how
Here's the
someone's
thing.
mood can affect their DNA.
I promise you, I would love to have more of that conversation. I'd love to have a session on
Have her back,
where have you back and we really talk about that, because these are the things, because I'm so interested in the and this is the This is a great oversimplification, so I would rather get this out where we're not on, so you can help me. But it appears to me as if we got to find some way to empower nurses, that we can't make enough doctors. But that if there was some way that we could find some way to get nurses and nurse practitioners and this into the system so that we could.
Well, we're trying, because what we're doing is so many of the interventions are food, supplements, things like that.
Yeah.
We actually do make a version for nutritionists, which is a great
Right.
starting place. It won't go as in depth into things like statin intolerance or blood clot risk, but it can
But if you could
absolutely
get
help
some
with
of the-
bone health and blood sugar and obesity and the vitamins that can support the heart health. And so
Or
that's
the
a great,
brain health,
and the
right?
brain health, absolutely. The nutritionist can do so. The reversal of cognitive impairment protocol, we can absolutely have done by a
But
nutritionist.
I love the idea of you approaching it from the nutritionist, approaching it that way, because that way you could get from there into the public that could and do some good that moves along that.
And it's a little more affordable. So it's
Exactly.
so it's still a matter of getting enough people trained, and that's kind of the phase that we're in right now.
And,
is
we-
getting
and we
people.
can see the trajectory. I mean, we have literally hundreds of reports that we could create, and we could create a specific one for anesthesiologists, so that their patients would understand, yes, I'm somebody who is sensitive to this type of anesthesiology.
Exactly.
Or we could do one for gynecology, for instance. There are some of those already out there for gynecology, but focusing the way we do on the chronic disease pieces as opposed to the cancer pieces or the inability to get pregnant or something like that.
Yeah. Like we can look at, there's a lot of different things. Again, from a family practice background, miscarriage risk actually is related to blood clot risk. It's related to your ability to clear toxins. There was a study in Ecuador. I don't know if we're
Making sure that we're still on. Yeah.
We're still on break?
Yeah, we're still on break. She can talk. To me. Go
okay.
ahead. In
But we may
Ecuador,
want to ask about that, because in Ecuador they did a study of, there's a really good.
We're ready to. You tell us when we're rolling. Oh, okay. So, all right. So, nothing. I just picked up the phone just to make sure that we were still. I was waiting for you to tell me for us to go again. All right. Now. All right. So we've been rolling during that time. So isn't that wonderful? So
That's
we'll
fun.
just continue to talk. I know. Go ahead. Go with Ecuador.
So when we talk about something for gynecologists, one of the things as a family physician is we would look at miscarriages not only as fertility issues in the same way that a gynecologist looks at them, but also because there can be blood clotting risks that contribute to miscarriages. Like if your platelets are too sticky or you make too much clots, those are known risk factors. But also, as an integrative physician, there's evidence that people who don't remove certain pesticides and herbicides and toxins well, that if they're overexposed, that increases their miscarriage risk. There was a study in Ecuador of a village that is a coffee growing village. And so it's a small village. The women there are almost all coffee pickers, and they would spray the coffee fields aerially so that there's heavy doses of glyphosate, which is Roundup. And what they found is in the women who had a particular genotype, so particular DNA variants, 2 copies of it, which was found in about 12% of the population, if they were coffee pickers living in this village, they had 5 to 8 times the risk of birth defects and miscarriages in their children compared to people who were able to remove these toxins well. So helping people to understand these things about themselves is really important, because there's stuff you can do. There's supplements, you can avoid the toxins, things that you can do to kind of help promote removal of those basically environmental toxins.
Environmental exposure is really important, and people do need to better understand the risks that they have. For macular degeneration, for instance, smoking increases your risk. Being around barbecue, but also if you live in a big city and you happen to, maybe you have a baby and you're in a stroller, the baby's in the stroller and you're walking, well, the baby's right at the height of the exhaust of all those cars. So there is a lot of exposure that's happening that we don't think to ourselves is going to somewhere down the line create a problem, but it does.
Sure.
And so if we have an opportunity to educate, and Sharon and I think of ourselves as an education company, as educators,
Exactly.
then we want to provide that information as well, because everybody has the choice to decide how they're going to live. They may not be able to accomplish their goals immediately, but if they understand what options they might have or they might employ, then that's going to create better health.
And there's certain foods, like for one of the detox pathways that can help with that, glyphosates, is Brazil nuts in some people can upregulate that pathway. Just eating 2 to 7. Don't eat too many because selenium is toxic if you eat too many.
Sure.
But 2 to 7 a week, so not very many. Or broccoli sprouts extract, which is has something in it called sulforaphane, can help with removing mercury, removing some of the pesticides and herbicides. And so, again, it's not something you might buy off the shelf every day, but if you know you're in that 12% of the population that's at super high risk for inability to clear the different things, even mercury, that may change what you eat or how you respond to it.
That's an extraordinary time. So where do you see you got? How are you plotting and planning your business, your education company? Because this is what you're doing. You're educating physicians. You're doing research, and you're continuing to. How do you spread? Because you're obviously growing. You're obviously going to. How do you think about that?
Well, I think about it in a lot of different ways. Right now, we're taking a multi-prong approach. We are going directly to the consumers in some small ways, providing opportunities for that educational component, and then providing an opportunity with doctors available for those people to come on board and decide if they want to take advantage of what we have to offer. So we do these talks in communities and provide the information. And then the other is to provide workshops and to attend and speak at different workshops around the country, which we do all year long, to clinicians. And in fact, we have 4 coming up for the remainder of this year that we will be attending, and then one that we will be creating for ourselves as well. We had one back in May, and we'll be having another one in December. So it's a slow process, in part because genomics is a new field of medicine.
Exactly.
It's not being taught in medical school, and in fact, there's quite a bit of resistance about it being taught in medical school.
And I'm fascinated with that part of the resistance as you're being a part of the leading edge of science.
I think it's hard for a medical school to embrace a technology that their professors don't yet know. And so one of the things, whenever I have someone from a medical school that's interested, I will walk the professor or walk whoever's interested in it through the genomics, showing how it can make decisions regarding things that they're comfortable with. They know that a certain percentage of the population get muscle aches from statins, and I'll show them how it's certain genes that can affect the breakdown of the statin, or genes that affect their muscles' ability to regenerate, or genes that affect CoQ10. So one of the things that Carol's talked about that I think that we would love to do in the future is eventually develop smaller reports, because if you're not an integrative medicine practitioner or a functional medicine practitioner, it may be too much to deal with all these different topics.
Absolutely.
But if we can just get cardiologists comfortable with the cardiac interventions, and we did at our last training have a cardiologist and a cardiac nurse practitioner at our training, because there is so much in our current genomics that relates to AFib and stroke and heart disease. But if we can do a smaller report for anesthesiologists, who is going to need less of certain anesthesia or they're going to not wake up well, who is going to need different kinds of anesthesia, or it can put them at risk for cognitive impairment. So I think that that's one thing we talk about, is doing specialty reports. But we also have our own passions. The reversal of cognitive impairment is one that we've already talked about, because it can be so devastating.
But you can't talk about it enough, because that is really, especially with the aging population, the boomers and all those of us, it's an interesting process of keeping the brain fresh and keep the interest. And I just think it's such a lovely.
And it's so different, because we have one professor who came to us, and a retired professor from UT, and there's a scoring system from 1 to 30, and if you have a 1, you're basically not verbal, and very significant dementia, and 30 is completely normal. And he came to us at a 19, which was already mild dementia.
Sure.
And he was able to bring himself in, though, because he's a bright, educated gentleman.
Sure.
And within 4 months, we had him back at a 26. Well, that's a huge difference.
That's huge.
Because we were able to kind of identify he had huge mitochondrial factors, had huge problems with detox, problems with other pathways, and so that were nutritional and various pathways. And we've had that kind of story over and over and over again. So that's one of our passions. Another one, as we said, our head scientist from Australia is Dr. Heather Way, and she's an autism expert. She's already in Australia using genomics reversed many hundreds of children from nonverbal to verbal.
Can you believe that?
Which
That
is,
This is incredible.
When you hear stories like that, what does that do to you as a mother and as a
Oh, it's so inspiring and encourages me to continue down the path that we've started, because, you know, the bottom line is, if you have a healthy population of people making decisions to support one another, is that not what we want for our entire universe?
Yes.
And so why wouldn't we go down this path?
Yes. Yeah.
and that's just beginning. The research is not quite done, so we basically have it just kind of available right now in our office and in Australia, and we're getting it to a place where we can release it to other doctors later in like 2020.
Yep.
But even just the ability, we had one young woman and we were using it, she's in her 20s, a UT student, and being able to help her better interact with her boyfriend by being able to adjust the fact that she didn't make enough oxytocin, which is kind of that hormone that women make when they have babies, for bonding, or that we were able to use her genomics to help make it so she felt more relaxed around other people, but also didn't have the sensitivity to taste. She said food went from tasting like gravel to silk after we adjusted things. So even these small differences that we're making in people's lives can be huge to them, and I think it's really what motivates Carol and I to work that 8 days a week.
Right. Yeah. And something really exciting I just wanted to add is that, you know, at the beginning, people would be coming in and telling us about their symptoms, but now we can look at their genomics and go, I bet you have this and this and this. And they go, yes.
It's a good party trick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, but at other times they will also come in and we will discuss their genomics with them and ask them, are you having this difficulty? For instance, do you have difficulty with sulfuric foods or things like, you know, difficulty metabolizing this? And they go, I knew that about myself. I always avoid that because it's so problematic for me. And that is extremely validating, creates higher levels of compliance in the patient because they're excited that someone finally understands what's going on.
They hear about it. Yeah, I watched this documentary on mountain gorillas, and that they would go from one place to another. They would eat, and then they would, but before they finished the foraging, they would move to the next. And that they actually balanced their diet, the blood that they did that they have. So it's in there.
It's in
that
there.
sense is in there. That, but we are either in this overly sensual world of taste, and it's hard to and inputs that we get.
Exactly.
It's hard to stay sensitive to that. But if we do, then we know.
And that takes me right back to that question you asked about the mind-body connection. With all those inputs that are not yours, you are overcome.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's an overwhelming place. I mean, isn't it wonderful to be in a career and a life that you know that you will never run out of curious, amazing, extraordinary things to think about and work into?
Yeah, we definitely agree with that. We actually joke with our whole team, and we say, are you guys bored? And we say, if you're ever bored, we're doing something wrong, because no one gets bored in the work we're doing.
That's so exciting. So what do you look for in a great teammate? When you're bringing, because as you continue to build out this team and this, what are the things that you look for in somebody that you're adding to the team?
Well, definitely education has a lot to do with that. And we're not necessarily looking for a whole host of PhDs, but we are looking for people who understand bioinformatics, who understand the connection between what's happening with these SNPs together, not just this one little piece and, oh, well, it can only be that. The person has to really be open-minded and understanding that we're in the process of pioneering this field.
Yes.
We're not at the end, we're at the beginning. So when we look to hire people, we really look for people who are interested in helping us to pioneer.
I think they have to be excited about what we're doing
Yep.
because when they're on the phone, we give a lot of support to our clinicians. So when a physician or a nutritionist, because we also make a version for nutritionists because there a lot of the ways that we can affect the human genome is with what we eat and supplements.
Thank you.
But when we're teaching these nutritionists or teaching these clinicians, our staff needs to be enthusiastic, and so
Yep.
we want them to be excited about what we're doing so that that translates, because it does. Everyone goes through a period of time when they're learning genomics when they're like, I don't know if I can, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can do this.
Of course.
And we always kind of joke. We have a saying.
Genomics is hard.
Thank you. Thank
So-
you. Yeah, exactly.
So we look for team members that can get past that and
Yeah.
that want to delve into the science and really make a difference. But we've been really, really lucky. We're in Austin, so at UT we've had a lot of our researchers, our research associates are
Yes.
just smart UT grads that had been immunology majors or biochemistry, done genetics, and just really are like, wow, this is actually allowing me to use my science degree to help humankind. And
Well, let's do this, because one of the things about reasonably spontaneous conversation is that this reboot here is that we are taking what is happening wonderful in Austin, and as I was talking to Clay Boykin, it's such a great incubator
it is.
for what can be done in the entire world. There's a lot of thought and creativity and freshness here, and neither one of you, I certainly am not from Austin,
Yeah.
but you're doing it here.
Yeah, it really is a wonderful community, and I think a testimony to that is when Dr. Wei came over from Australia, and she has been working on the autism report, and we were talking about hiring a research associate for her. She actually had options of getting a PhD in Australia, doing lots of different options, and she's like, you've had such great luck and have such great people on your team here in Austin with
Yep.
your UT science grads. I'll work with one of them. Can I have one of them? She
There-
wanted,
There you go, and it is, and it's one of the opportunities here. There's a real, there's such a strong. I mean, there's a strong energy here. There is a lot of powerful women who are here, who are in so many of that's where I'm excited about. I see what you guys are doing and how you're building this model up, and I'm not sure that if one of you two were a man, the testosterone model, that you would be building it in the same way that you are building it now.
Well, I can speak to that just a little bit. A lot of people think that when you're a startup company that the rites of passage are that you do step 1, step 2, step 3, where you
Yeah.
get to venture capital and then eventually somebody buys you out and you're out of your business.
Exactly.
That is not our goal. We love what we do. We want to be involved in what we do until we can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
And so it's not that we aren't interested in other people's input, but we're not interested in other people telling us what we have to do or
Yep.
how we're going to do it, and that they influence us because of their financial input. So Sharon and I have bootstrapped this company all on our own and are finally getting to a place where we feel like we're making some traction, and excited about that. We're super excited that we have led this particular path and that we're making traction in a way that other people are starting to notice. And we're getting calls now because doctors are hearing from their patients, I've heard about Intellig's DNA.
Which is wonderful.
Could you please do that for me?
Yeah.
And I mean, it doesn't get any better than that.
It doesn't.
That's
Doesn't-
exactly what we
Doesn't
want.
that give you that? I mean, I think about that because if we cannot get pleasure during the process, you're never going to get it when the result comes in. If you've got to be able to enjoy it along the way. Are you having fun? Are we doing something meaningful today as we're going through the process, right?
Yeah, no, I love it. I actually do spend a lot of my weekends researching because it's when I have quiet time. But I'm like, oh my gosh, this helps us understand, what's going on in this particular situation. And I think I found a way for us to address this particular kind of, microglial brain inflammation or whatever it is.
It's exciting.
And it's
very
really
exciting.
fun. There's new studies coming out all the time too, and we just are constantly then able to kind of go and add more things.
And that's one of the things that I love about the internet, because it feels like that we have actually connected in a way, the consciousness of humanity altogether. Because think about how quickly a peer review could get up there, and you could learn about it so quickly that it would have taken 20 years ago.
Well, it's still a slow process. I mean, the research that's being done doesn't usually make it into the mainstream marketplace until at least 5 years. And because
Is there any way to shorten that? Is
That's
there
what
any
we're
way to
doing.
do
That's what we're doing.
So we always say what we're doing is we're translating the research that was done by PhDs that's in the published literature and making it accessible to the people who are taking care of patients, to physicians and nurse practitioners, naturopaths, all kinds of different healthcare providers, because most healthcare providers don't have time to go and read all the different journals. So that's exactly what we do, is say, oh wow, isn't this amazing that hydrogen water can help with brain, it's something that can help with oxidative stress in the brain, and it matches up with this gene. Or isn't this amazing that whatever supplement.
What I love, because when I was growing up, there was this alternative healing movement that got a lot of negative press because it was it's woo woo, it's auras and changes and all that, and you're putting the science to what that was the undercurrent. You're matching the science up to that.
Well, and people frequently would say to me, so I started out being interested in alternative medicine when I was a medical student at Harvard, and actually got funding from Harvard to run a alternative medicine lecture series. And we had Bernie Siegel and Deepak Chopra and really great leaders in the field. So it was really great that we were being supported, but getting medical students and doctors to show up was really hard. I mean, I would have to go to the hospital and invite the nurses because I didn't want the amphitheater to be empty. And people would say, well, Sharon, you're academic. Why are you doing this integrative stuff or alternative medicine stuff? And I say to them, you know what? This is the first time in medicine since I left medical school and left the research part of medical school that we're actually using the basic science to help humans get well, because we're saying this works on mitochondria, this works on this gene receptor or this neurotransmitter or this transporter for a hormone. And so we actually will always tell our clinicians, what you're doing with integrative medicine is the most academic form of medicine you can do. And I will really support that and can hold my own against most academicians.
God, and you're finding the same thing in your research and your practice with your patients.
Absolutely.
And what about the level of education, of self-education? Because one of the things that I'm seeing is that we cannot sit down and go to the doctor and say, okay, well, whatever you say, doc. It's like, I got to be part of it. I got to be bringing in.
Well, the people, in truth. So Sharon and I each had our own practices independently.
Right.
And when we realized that together we could create better outcomes for our patients, I was still in my own practice and she was in her own practice, but we were doing research together and bringing that forward. And so the reason behind that was because we were attracting those people who were so ill, they had to do their own research in order to get any help. And so they were looking for people who wouldn't look down on them and wouldn't tell them that they were crazy, essentially, but that they really did have a bead on what was going on inside their own body. I mean, go figure. You have your own body. You might know more about that than somebody else. And so we took the challenge, and we didn't just put our toes in the pool. We jumped in.
And I see that, and that's what you're building. I mean, what I love about what you're doing is that you're empowering rather than prescribing.
Absolutely, because we really firmly believe that there is no way that a piece of paper, a genetic tool, artificial intelligence can determine what's right for Dennis. It needs to be Dennis along with his physician or healthcare provider in a conversation regarding what's going to work for you. What do you want to do? Are you someone who is going to improve your growth factors for your brain by doing more intense exercise? Are you going to change what you eat? Or do we need to give you a supplement? Or do we just say, if you don't want to improve it, it has a 2.7-fold increased risk
There
of
you-
Alzheimer's, and that's up to you.
And you know that, and you know that, so that's fine. You can change the oil at 3,000 miles, or you can do it at 5,000
That's
miles.
exactly right.
Yeah.
Right. And so we built this to empower clinicians, but there's also no way that any clinician can memorize 600 or 1,000 different gene variants and what to do
Right.
about it. So what we built is a tool that puts someone's DNA in front of their physician, along with information about all the genes, along with information about what are potential ways that you can intervene or modify those pathways.
And what's really fun is the patient's response. One of our patients said, I feel like I am working with my body instead of beating it into submission. I just thought that was fabulous. And another woman said, you know, I feel like I'm going to be healthier in the second half of my life than I was in the first.
Yeah.
I mean, that's huge.
That is huge.
That
That is
is huge.
huge. That's the thing that I love about your practice, and both of you of what you're doing is that we can truly see some opportunities to where we've been bouncing up against this model that we have of fixing people, and then of seeing what we're doing, and actually being able to refresh and get that going and see where we're connected.
Yeah. We really love it, and it's fun as well, because like in our office, we have, out of a few hundred patients, almost no one who has hypertension anymore. Because when you address people's underlying genomics of inflammation, calcification, all these different things going on, and you help them kind of talk to their body and know what's beneficial, then the high blood pressure goes away. So there's so many different things like that. Blood sugar. I have one person, she has type 1 diabetes, so of course she's on insulin, but our type 2 diabetics never get to needing insulin. They barely end up needing medications. We end up using some medications sometimes, depends on where they are again in that path. But again, when they understand their bodies, they're so much more able to control what's going on. So we really, we love what we're doing.
When you're dealing with things like depression, or you're dealing with how do you work with that? I mean, is there's still role for talking therapy and being just being heard? Clay
Sure,
Boyk and I on the
absolutely.
previous, the
Absolutely.
chance of being heard actually lifts that sense that I don't feel powerless.
Right, right. Well, I work with a lot of people who have chronic pain, and depression is, something
It
that
is, because that's what chronic pain does work.
it does come very strongly behind the symptoms, and the chronicity of it is what sometimes creates the depression. Some people tend toward depression. I actually do tend toward depression, and I have to work at not allowing myself to go down that path.
Sure.
And I use my genomics to help me do that. But the bottom line is every patient needs to be heard, because until we understand what the experience is for them, we can't help them anyway. We can have a ton of data, but if we're not supporting that person where they live, it doesn't matter.
Yes, and that's where I think that there's, in this model, if we can get to the insurance, get into the model to where, like through nutrition, I mean, you've given me some hope, because I've been a big proponent of empowering nurses, but now if I could see this, if we could get to it through nutritionists would have a lower barrier to allow people to be able to get into this healing modality.
Right, and then they can refer to a physician if it's something that needs a physician.
Sure, but it's still, if you could get to 40% or 60%, you get to a large portion of them, you could then.
Well, nurses don't have the ability to prescribe.
Right.
And so
Even supplements? I mean, I know they can't prescribe supplements, but they can recommend. Can nutritionists could?
It depends on the laws of the state. So nutritionists do work under physicians, and so there are some different laws depending on the state.
Right.
But I think that our goal is to work with whatever healthcare licensed providers want to
Right.
work with us. So we will not sell to somebody who doesn't have a healthcare license, but we have chiropractors that are doing a great job of working with patients that have cognitive impairment, which you wouldn't think would be the typical chiropractic field, but if that's their
I do.
interest, that's great. We have nutritionists, we have naturopaths, we have DOs, MDs, nurse practitioners, PAs. Again, the majority of our users right now have been integrative physicians.
That'd be the allopathic model.
Most of them are,
Right.
I mean, I would say the majority are MDs and DOs,
Right.
but it is expanding, and it just depends on who is interested in learning.
Well, this is where we're learning. I mean, you are setting the stage for, can imagine in 50 years how this could be from the work that you're doing now.
And our ultimate goal, so in order to get something approved as by insurance, you have to go through a series of processes, and we are just starting to have our genomics used in some studies. Dr. Dale Bredesen, who wrote the book, The End of Alzheimer's, and has really been a leader in the field of reversal of cognitive impairment, is using our genomics in a study with 3 of his co-authors and fellow MDs. And so that's great.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Congratulations.
And
excited
so
about
really
that.
our goal is to work with people who want to do research. Dr. Way is doing research on autism, and we're looking at some other collaborations in those fields. So if we get the research out there, then we'll be in a better position when there's a lot of publications saying, look, if you personalize medicine using genomics, we're able to show that you get improvement in cognitive scores, because we actually do test before and after and like every 4 to 6 months. But then it also, you can show, well, if you can avoid someone going into a memory care center, which can be like $60,000 a year.
I know.
Then someone goes, okay, you're going to spend $1,000 or $2,000 on genomics, depending on different factors, but it's going to be worth it, because once they understand their book of you, then they can keep that user manual for the rest of their lives.
All right. And what else do we need to know in the last few minutes here? What we want to do is just to see what are the things that I have not talked about, and I realize that we have talked about a tiny sliver of all the things we need to talk about. But talk about some of the things that are on that you think that we haven't talked about that might be on this particular time to be able to share about, either of you.
It's hard to pick a topic.
Sure,
in
it doesn't matter.
2
Don't
minutes.
worry. It'll just be some topic. Serendipitously dip into the well and pull something out.
I think the one thing, you had asked a question earlier that I'd love to circle back to, and about kind of some of the criticism of genomics.
Yes.
And one of the main waves, and kind of science goes in waves, one of the main waves right now is that we've realized that it's not only about your DNA, but your RNA, which is your, how the DNA is what we call expressed. So DNA can be turned on and off. So some people are going, well, maybe we shouldn't look at the genomics. We should look at this RNA, what's turned on in the blood. And I think that one of the most important things to understand about that, of why we say, yes, that's a great tool, but it doesn't replace genomics, is realizing that your DNA doesn't change from the day you're born to the day you die, unless you have some things go awry.
Right.
It's not really changing. And that if you look at blood, which is where you could get the RNA, you're missing what's going on in the brain, what's going on in the bones, what's going on in the heart muscles. Because the very interesting thing about DNA is turned on or off in different tissues. So we really have to go back to the DNA and match it with studies of the diseases and say, this DNA gene variant it controls inflammation in the brain, and we know it's in the promoter, which is the switch that turns it on, and we know that this particular variant's associated with twice the risk of Alzheimer's. Well, then if you have that, you're going to go, well, we're going to want to address that particular kind of inflammation. So we're not opposed, again, it's very popular right now to look at metabolomics, the metabolism and the proteomics, the proteins in the
Sure.
blood, and we're not opposed to that. But what we always say is it doesn't replace your genome, because from one cell of your genome, from the DNA Intelix DNA kit, it's a saliva kit. So you spit into a tube, and from the cells that are coming from the inside of your cheek, we get the DNA that can be turned on and off in your heart, in your bones, in your eyes, in your brain. And so it gives us so much information with a really accessible test. And so that's something that why we are dedicated to genomics. So.
And your experience in this, did you see yourself as a business person? Did you see yourself as a part of the leading edge of science? Has that been a dream for you, Carol?
I think the short answer is yes. I did see myself, even as a young child, as somebody who was going to be bringing something forward that was very important. The what was unclear to me, and actually frustrated me to no end for many years. But I think that having the path that I took, which seemed like it was doing a whole lot of different things as opposed to just one trajectory, brought me to this place. And frequently I'm standing back and I'm going, gosh, maybe somebody else should be doing this, because, you know, I'm not this or I'm not that. But the reality is I'm the one here. And so I'm stepping into my shoes every day and
doing a great job.
Thank you.
That's what I agree with. I love it, because if we're not a little bit uncomfortable, then we're not trying hard enough. If there isn't some idea of some opportunity of risk and of what do we not know, and what do we want to learn and what we can, and that's where I see you going.
Yeah. Well, I feel extraordinarily responsible about the kind of information and the delivery of this information that we're providing. It's not for everyone. It really isn't. There are some people who, you know, not that genomics wouldn't apply to everyone and create a better way of living, but that some people are just not ready for it. It's not in their time frame right now.
Right.
And at the same time, there are a lot of direct-to-consumer products out there that provide information that may or may not be accurate. We don't know that for certain. We'd have to go back and test every single one, every single product that's out there. We simply can't do that.
No.
But what we put out there, it's so important to me that we make sure that we're doing it with the highest level of accuracy and the highest level of integrity, that because we're changing lives.
Yep.
We are not just playing around in the sand. We
Right.
are changing lives.
Yeah.
And to me, I'm not willing to take that risk and put somebody in a bad place. I'm just not.
Yep. But that's where the research is. That's where the science, putting the science into this, and this is why you're not just sitting back looking at, oh, come on, Pfizer, buy us, you know, come on and get us there so we can have that island in the Caribbean.
We'd still be doing it.
Yeah, say fine, all right, but we want that clause in there that we get a chance to be our own people and be what we're doing today. What a delight! This was so much of a learning process. Will people be able to see the video? Could we have a link to that video so that people who would watch the program would be able to look at?
Yes, as soon as we will have access to that video for you guys pretty soon.
Good.
So, yeah.
And when you do, as you continue to do the education, I hope you'll come back and tell us more about about the work that you're doing and the opportunities, because it's very exciting to me. It's exciting to me because this body is such the fact that life even happens against the second law of thermodynamics. It actually occurs and evolves and comes out, and the complexities and the majesties and the magic of the human body blow me away. The little bit I know
No, it really is. Just yesterday, one of our other doctors in our practice brought me an article. So everyone always brings us things, which is wonderful. And she with the mitochondria is what give people energy.
Yes.
But that's a big involvement in Parkinson's, and showing that people who had problem with that CoQ10, that if they take way high doses like 600 milligrams and they had these 2 gene variants, they could do a lot better with their Parkinson's. And so the way we look at it is everyone needs their user's manual. I mean, if something as simple as taking more of one or less, more or less of something can help, that's great. And then wouldn't it be great if we had our user manual at age 2 instead of at age 80?
And it's wonderful. And what I'd like you to do is to provide a quick start guide with it, so that it isn't just all the fine print. Give me a few pictures and ways of it, because if we could begin talking about this early, and empowering early and helping people to understand that this is my vehicle, that I'm getting a chance
And wouldn't
to
that
do.
be wonderful if it was taught in grade school?
Yes.